In today's video, I explore a stunning part of Scotland's coast to find the best shutter speeds for beautiful seascape images like these.
This morning I've come to Seacliff Bay. It's about an hour's drive from Edinburgh. We've got some amazing conditions. It's only about 6:30 in the morning. You can probably see that we've got lovely warm morning light on my face at the moment. But look what we've got here. Lovely castle. We've got all kinds of rocks. We've got the ocean. We've got the light. We've got some cloud interest. I've got a really good opportunity to get some nice photos this morning. So the first shot that I want to get is going to be incorporating the castle, because we've got that gorgeous light falling on it. It looks great. It stands out really nicely against the blue sky. So I've been looking around for some nice foreground. It seemed fairly obvious to me to try and use the coast, to try and use some of these rocks and the water coming in. The one in particular that I found is this one here. We've got some nice shape to it, and I love the way the water is sort of coming in and swirling around it. So I want to use a slightly slower shutter speed. But I don't want this to be a real long exposure. I don't want it to be several minutes like I've done in some of my previous videos. I want it to be maybe a quarter of a second, maybe half a second, just that hint of movement in the water. And I'll show you what I mean. So this is the scene that I've got. As you can see, I've got the rocks here in the foreground, a castle here in the upper part of the frame, and we've got this little inlet here where this water is going to come in and swirl around, exactly as it is doing here. So this is definitely a scene where I want to use a long exposure, because you get that suggestion of motion of the water when it blurs just a little bit. But if you use a really long one of 5-10 seconds or even in the minutes, then all of that motion just turns to one ghostly blur and you lose all of the texture. So by just using a shutter speed of maybe, I'm actually going to take it to a second and see how that goes. So the way I like to shoot when I'm doing shots like this is basically put the camera on burst mode and just keep on taking shots. And as every different wave rolls in, you get different patterns of water. You get some when the water's coming in and it's really filling up the gaps around the rocks. But then you can get really nice effects as it drains away and the water really flows down those channels. And that can look really, really great too. So by taking a whole bunch of shots, I can go through them later and find the one with the patterns that work just right. Let's just have a quick look at some of these shots that I've got. This one, for example, already on screen, that's helpful. By using a slightly shorter shutter speed of a little under a second, look at all this detail that we've maintained in these sort of like waves that come around here. It gives a really great sort of ghostly look to the image, but it hasn't completely smoothed out the water. You can still see what it's doing. It really gives that impression of motion as it crashes around the rocks. Just to show you what I mean, I've been using a 6-stop ND filter before, blocking out 6 stops of light. I've just swapped it out for a 10-stop, and that's giving me a shutter speed of about 8 seconds, I think. So I actually really like it, and I think with some Lightroom love, then this could be a really, really nice shot. But I think a slightly faster shutter speed is the way to go. I like having more of that detail in the water. I'm going to take a few, and I'm probably going to take some maybe in between, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and see how that goes. Also going to try and not get covered in seawater, and not get my camera covered in seawater. So I'm trying a few different angles, I'm trying slightly different compositions. Obviously this one is vertical, we've still got these nice rocks here in the foreground, we've still got the castle up here. But the process is the same. I'm waiting for the big waves to come in, and I'm basically keeping my finger held down. At the moment I'm going for about a half-second exposure, because I do think that is where I'm getting the best texture on the water. If we just have a quick zoom in on that, I just love that you can still see where all that water is, where you get that nice ghostly effect, but you keep the texture, you keep that real sense of motion
rather than it being one of those like ethereal, ghostly scenes. Of course, as with everything, it's just down to taste, and I am trying to get a range of shots at different shutter speeds so that when I get back into Lightroom later, I can choose the ones that I want. If you are doing shots like this, do bring a big memory card though, because oh wow, these waves are amazing. Because as you sit here shooting away, you keep your finger on the button and you just take shot after shot after shot. So I reckon I'll have already taken hundreds of photos, and by the time I'm done here this morning, comfortably I'll have taken 1,000. I think this is a really good example. You can really see where the water's flowing. You get that drama. We've even got a bit of a blurred wave that crashed up here. I really like this. This is probably going to be one of the ones I'll end up editing. But of course, as I say, I've taken loads. Oh, I mean, look at these. Yeah, I'm enjoying this. I'm going to try and get a few more, and then I'm going to find somewhere else to go. So my scene here is using the water coming in here as really nice foreground on these rocks. We've got this one nice and static in the middle of the frame, and of course Bass Rock in the distance. But my technique remains basically the same. I've got my 6-stop ND on the front. That gives me a shutter speed of 1.6 seconds at f11. Get my focus and then fire off multiple frames as this water comes and goes. But as I'm walking around, what I'm looking for is more of these pools. Anything that's going to give me a good opportunity to put the castle in the background, maybe even use the water itself as a nice reflection. If I get nice and low and bounce that castle off it. So I'm thinking if I go this side of the water, up here, again, treading very carefully, I can get something like this, but not here, because this isn't the most compelling of foregrounds. So maybe over here. Okay, I definitely think there's something here. But as with anything, it's just going to be a case of moving around the scene and trying to refine my shot. It may be that I need to walk out, oops, into this pool a little bit and get something like this. Okay, I'm going to work on this. I found a scene I really like now, and by zooming in, I've framed the reflection in this little pool here. I've had to raise it up just enough to make sure that there is a gap between the reflection of the castle and this bit of rock itself. But I think maybe as a one-to-one square crop, this shot could look really nice. So I'm going F10, focusing on the castle. I've still got my 10-stop ND filter. It's giving me a shutter speed of 13 seconds, which is just enough so that the little ripples on here are going to completely smooth out. So I'm going to take my shot. So as you can see from my library, I took a lot of photos this day, and I'm really glad I did, because you do get such a range of different shots depending on what the wave's doing. Like if we just take this shot, for example, there's only a little bit of sort of trickling water in the background, but most of these rocks are pretty bare, which means that it's not that exciting a photo, whereas maybe only a few seconds later we start to get a bit more waves coming in, we get some water splashing over these rocks, and certainly as with some of my favorite ones that I've already done some edit work on, you can really see that we get all this texture flowing over the rocks. And it's that texture that I think is really important, or certainly what I like the most in doing seascape photos. If we just have a look back at a photo that I showed earlier, this was a 13-second exposure, and it's given this very ghostly, ethereal effect, which I do like, but I just think that it loses some of that impact. You get very much like this dreamy effect, but you lose the realism of actually seeing that water splashing around the rocks. Whereas I think using a shutter speed of, what's this one? This one is 1.5 seconds. It's kept that texture, so you still believe that this is water, and instead you still get that impression of motion as it flows over the rock. So it is important to play around with your shutter speeds. This shot, for example, was another one at 1.6 seconds, but clearly the water was really splashing in quite aggressively in this moment. As a result, this image is very chaotic, and I don't like it quite as much. I prefer it looking a little bit more tranquil. This shot is my absolute favorite from the day. It's because we've got that impression of water coming in. This was taken at 3/5 of a second, so not quite a very long exposure, but it's just enough to give some motion blur. As a result, I love what it's done to the water down here. It's almost turned it into ribbons as it flows over the rock. I really, really like it. But I made sure to take it as the water was ebbing away, and so as a result, we've still got these rocks here exposed. The water is running around them rather than them being covered, and I just think this gives a really nice sort of tranquil effect where you really look at it and feel like you can imagine what the water was looking like as it was flowing down over those rocks. So for me, when I take shots like this, I tend to start with a shorter shutter speed, seeing what the effect is, and then build it up into longer and longer ones, rather than starting with things like 10 or 15 seconds and then making it shorter. Because for me, my taste is to have some of that texture rather than making it go completely ghostly. But of course, I'm very interested to hear what you think, whether you prefer shots like this or whether you prefer everything being smoothed out into a nice ghostly flow. So please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, and please do hit this like button if you've enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and I will see you next time.